Welcome to the 2021 Rush Graduate College Hooding Ceremony. Well, this is not the way we thought we'd be celebrating again this year. We're glad that you've joined us for our virtual event. Even though it's almost cliche to say, this is an unprecedented time. In March of last year, Rush University leadership made the difficult decision to initiate remote coursework delivery and then subsequently to close the academic building and research laboratories. For didactic courses, this move to remote delivery was fairly complex and resulted in differences for both students and faculty. The initial odd remote school feeling became a little bit more comfortable, while our personal lives became more complex. Laboratory-based experimental research requires access to the laboratories, and as the experimental phase of this work stopped, students used the time efficiently to analyze and write up their work. The resiliency of all students in the graduate college, at Rush University, and at universities around the world was on full display during the last year and was truly remarkable. The very definition of resilience is on display here today. It is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, or to cope in spite of setbacks or barriers. Resilience is a measure of how much you want something, and how much you're willing and able to overcome obstacles to get it. It has to do with your emotional strength. And the graduates you see here today have that kind of resilience that's going to help them immensely moving forward with their careers. Since 1981, Rush University's Graduate College has celebrated our students in many ways. Today is a celebration of success, the hooding of our graduates. While the origins of the hooding ceremony and the donning of academic regalia are unknown, it is believed they originated in the 12th and 13th centuries in Europe. Medieval scholars wore robes for warmth while working and studying in unheated monasteries and libraries. While the regalia are practical, robes were soon considered academic dress that denoted rank and stature. Although there's no definitive information regarding when academic robes became symbolic, or which American institution first began using regalia to denote degree attainment, robes and hoods today recognize the scholarly career and field of learning of each graduate. While modern-day undergraduates wear robes and caps, those with master's or doctorate degrees are presented with hoods to show their continued pursuit of knowledge. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Oliver Bogler, who is the director of the Center for Cancer Training at the National Cancer Institute, a branch of the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Bogler studied natural sciences at the University of Cambridge, completed his doctoral work at the Ludwig Institute for Cancer Research in London, and did postdoctoral training at the Salk Institute and Ludwig Institute and the San Diego branch. He's held faculty appointments at Virginia Commonwealth University, Henry Ford Hospital, and the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, where he also served as director of basic research for the Brain Tumor Center. His research focused on epidermal growth factor receptor signaling and novel platinum compounds in glioblastoma. In 2010, he became MD Anderson's vice president for global academic programs, where he managed a network of 35 sister institutions in 22 countries. In 2011, he was also appointed senior vice president for academic affairs, where he stewarded MD Anderson's education mission, supporting 1,700 faculty and more than 2,000 trainees and students. Dr. Bogler then became Chief Operating Officer at the ECHO Institute at the University of New Mexico, where he supported efforts to improve services to underserved populations in healthcare and education by making expert knowledge more accessible. Most recently, Dr. Bogler joined the National Cancer Institute as director of the Center of Cancer Training, where he oversees NCI's training and career development programs that prepare scientists both within NCI and around the country to advance cancer research. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Oliver Bogler.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bean. Thank you, colleagues, graduates, and families for the opportunity to be with you on this amazing occasion today. I particularly want to thank my friend Dr. Bean for so generously lending me these fantastic academic robes I'm wearing. I know that you can't see them, but I wanted to mention them in case you thought I was giving this speech in my pajamas. Also, since you cannot see me, I want you to know that I'm looking at two bobbleheads standing right here on my desk. I'll get to those later. I commend Rush on its use of a virtual environment to gather us in for this hooding ceremony, and that we're not in yet another video conference. I mean, we probably are all getting our fill of those right now. Here, by contrast, we get to enjoy virtual flowers and bonfires, balloons, and I was able to observe the impressive backflips of the Rush faculty. Graduates, I hope that you feel a real sense of accomplishment and pride. It took a lot of hard work to get your degree, many years of planning, commitment, and sticking with it during the tough times. And you brought your best, and you succeeded. Fantastic. My heartfelt congratulations to you on accomplishing this. Today is a great day for looking back and savoring the moment. I can still very well remember two things from when I graduated. First was a moment when I was lying lazily in the garden of my college a few days after completing final exams, but before the graduation ceremony. I was looking up at the clouds passing overhead and had this intense feeling of not having to do anything specific that day. After many years of heavily scheduled learning, this was new and exhilarating. I imagined it was the way an ox feels when it is released from the plow at the end of a long day. The other feeling was one of having been stuffed to the brim with things I learned and not wanting to even look at anything remotely scholarly. I didn't move to the States until a few years later. Now I equate that feeling with the way I feel after a traditional American Thanksgiving dinner. If you do that right, you can barely move after you're done, and you cannot imagine ever eating again. So if you have the feeling that you are done with learning just right now, I totally understand. But give yourself some time, do some other things, and pretty soon you might start thinking about the leftovers, and then you'll find yourself sneaking into the kitchen to make a turkey sandwich. My apologies to the vegetarians and vegans among you, and to the turkeys. My first taste of the smorgasbord of knowledge came a long time ago in a country far away. I was born and raised in Germany, and my first school was an American IB school in Frankfurt. My parents sent me there so that I would be fluent in English, as they were, and because they admired the American idea of making learning fun for young kids, something the German school system is not traditionally known for. I will forever remember my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Simpson. He had long blonde hair, a soft West Virginia accent, and sang Puff the Magic Dragon for us while playing the guitar. If this was education, I was in. Seriously, though, I believe that the pleasure I feel when learning new things to this day stems from the experiences at that school, where individual exploration and creativity were nurtured. And I think this is key. I wager that a good number of you will be educators, whether formally in teaching roles, in your jobs as you mentor others, and informally in your family and social circles. My advice, make it fun for those who are learning. So with joy in learning on board, my next stop was to attend a boarding school in England when I was 12. It was here that I developed my lifelong interest in biology. The school had excellent scientific programs, not only in terms of the resources, but also in the way that our masters, and yes, that's what we call teachers in such a school, nurtured curiosity and modeled it. Several of them had PhDs. I remember one of them would spend his summer studying local bird populations and then publish a letter in Nature on it. In the classroom, they focused on helping us understand the mechanisms and principles underlying science, rather than rote learning. And so these lessons were the ones that held my attention without fail. I fell in love with biology because I began to understand some simple principles about how living beings worked. I encourage you to always focus on nurturing that understanding when you teach and mentor others. It is the bedrock of knowledge. Facts you can always look up, especially these days. And this is where the first bobblehead comes in. I remember reading a book called Man-Made Life by Jeremy Cherfas the year it came out, 1982, and writing about it for the school magazine. It was the coolest thing. You might say POG today, perhaps. It described how scientists were moving genes around between plasmids using restriction enzymes. Wow, the possibilities seemed staggering. It started my fascination with DNA and the tools being developed to manipulate it, right at the time when this was coalescing into the discipline of molecular biology. That summer at home, my dad lent me his paperback copy of The Double Helix, a personal account of the discovery of the structure of DNA by, of course, James Watson. Years later, I bought a bobblehead of Dr. Watson, and I'm looking at it now. He holds a double helix between his hands, and he smiles confidently. The Double Helix is a fascinating read, and not overly long. While I no longer recommend it as illustrative of how science is or should be, I still recommend it as a historical document. The time I read it, Dr. Watson was a giant, and his book an exemplary tale of how sheer intellect and creativity solved one of the most interesting puzzles in science, and unlocked an unprecedented revolution in biology. I admired Watson and Crick, and for me science was what they did. It was a pure occupation, the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. According to the book, they spent long days in deep intellectual conversation, built models, and discussed the lofty scientific questions of the day. They networked with colleagues and competitors across the world who were working on the same puzzles and brought insights back to the lab. In the end, they prevailed because they were the smartest. It's not surprising, therefore, that I chose to study science as an undergrad. I was fortunate to get into Cambridge and attended the college whose most famous alum was arguably also the most famous real Oliver so far, Oliver Cromwell. His head is rumored to be buried on the college grounds somewhere, after being surreptitiously removed from its spike on Traitor's Gate. It was an amazing privilege to be in such a historical place and to be learning the latest science. I specialized in biochemistry, which at the time was where the molecular biologists hung out. Two of my professors would later win Nobel Prizes. These scientists were my heroes. I absorbed it like a sponge and dreamed of my own research career. During my time there, I visited the pub where Watson and Crick famously announced that they had, quote, discovered the secret of life. It's called the Eagle, and I recommend it as a place for a nice pint of bitter if you find yourself in Cambridge. I also stood with reverence at the Cavendish Laboratory, the site where it had been at the time that Watson and Crick worked on DNA. This was where many of the science departments were housed when I was a student, and so I passed it regularly on my way to lectures or labs. Years later, I was a postdoc at the Salk Institute while Dr. Crick was on faculty there, and I would occasionally catch a thrilling glimpse of him as he walked across the Institute's stunning inner courtyard on his way to his office. I have to say that when I look at my Watson bobblehead these days, it is hard for me to recreate those exact feelings. The world's perspective has shifted, and so has mine. I'll not review all that has been written or said about Dr. Watson, but I'll mention two things. The first is the now indisputable evidence that Dr. Rosalind Franklin generated important data and ideas that were key to Watson and Crick's solving of the DNA puzzle, something that they had suppressed at the time. Dr. Franklin was a collaborator and competitor of Watson and Crick, and it is hard not to see their acts as anything but sexist. The other is that Dr. Watson has given voice to, and put his not inconsiderable scientific heft behind, unproven, controversial ideas. For example, that differences in average measured IQ between blacks and whites are due to genetics. Again, it is hard not to see that as a direct racist echo of the discredited discipline of eugenics. Regarding Dr. Crick, if you saw the recently released documentary Picture a Scientist, and I recommend it if you haven't, you'll know that he also committed acts towards female colleagues that would be classified as sexual assault today. I guess that while having heroes gives you a guiding light to follow, you have to prepare yourself for the day you learn that they too have feet of clay. I'm not saying don't have them. Have heroes, but don't expect them to be anything but flawed and human. On a much smaller scale, as I progressed through my own PhD work at the London branch of the Ludwig Institute, that branch that no longer exists, and postdocs at Salk and another Ludwig in San Diego, I was making important experiences about science and scientists, not all good. I always had great buddies in the lab that I worked in and learned much from my peers. And while I mostly had great mentors, there were some notable exceptions as well. And then there was always the competition. As you might imagine, the blows to my own idealized vision of science, and of course to my ego, were painful. Scientists were not, in fact, some kind of pure seekers of truth, rather people with weaknesses and biases. They compete, often ruthlessly, and not always with the best interests of the field in mind, let alone humanity, and not always ethically. They are blind to assumptions that underlie their worldview and that it can influence their work. I can still recall the pain of being scooped the first time by a paper that, in my opinion, oversimplified the issue at hand, in order to make a more publishable story, or the anger at having my work ignored in a review of the field written by someone I had regarded as a colleague and with whom I had shared unpublished data. Even if you subtract the sour grapes that I ate because sometimes I was legitimately bested, the world of science was looking a bit different. While I reconciled myself to the realities of the world and pursued research for another 15 years or so through faculty positions at 3 different institutions, I can't deny that some of these experiences weren't in the mix when I took the opportunity to shift my career. I very much enjoyed having a lab, training students and postdocs, and doing the research. In my experience, there is little in the world that is as thrilling as learning something new because of the work that your team did. But there were also tough days, and when papers get rejected, grants don't get funded, and experiments fail. I have to be honest, I could see myself doing it in my 30s and 40s, but not in my 50s or 60s. So I started thinking of other things to do. My advice? Don't be afraid to consider new directions. Allow yourself to change as you go through life. I'm not the same at 55 as I was at 45 or 35. So why should my job be the same? I mean, it might be for you. I recommend you keep an open mind and find your own path. The other realization that drove me to look at different roles in science was that I liked working with people. One of my tasks had been to organize a group of investigators to put together a big group grant. And through that, I learned that I can work effectively with other scientists, many of whom are not that easy to get along with. I can say this from the safety of my remote location. Maybe I could run programs and perform functions that make good use of my people skills. Perhaps you too will discover things that you like to do and are good at that you're not aware of today as you go through your career. Again, be open. In the years following my promotion to professor, I was fortunate to be able to take on 2 different roles at the Cancer Center where I worked, and a few years later I closed my lab. By that time, I was fulfilling both administrative roles and also had some personal issues to contend with. My wife, also a cancer scientist, had been diagnosed with breast cancer about 5 years earlier and had come through her 9-month-long treatment course well enough. Married couples are supposed to share everything. I mean, some people might say that my own diagnosis with breast cancer took things a little far, but I was committed to the principle. From a biological point of view, what was most interesting and took me a bit by surprise was that my treatment was essentially identical to hers, which is perhaps a bit odd for a hormone-driven disease. It turns out that there is almost no first-hand data on breast cancer in men, largely because it's so rare. About 1% of breast cancers are detected in men, and men are still often not included in breast cancer clinical studies. I've done some awareness raising and advocacy in this space, and I'm inordinately proud that I have found the one thing where a middle-aged white man can complain about not being included in 2021 without being cancelled. I also realized a lifetime ambition of mine through this work, having my photo in the New York Times. Topless. Real talk. I found great response in the clinical cancer research community when I've asked people to consider including men in trials where it makes biological sense. It's always been well received. Anyway, all this was also in the mix when I decided to close my lab and refocus on my other roles. I'm sure some of my colleagues saw closing my lab as a failure. I don't, and I'll be honest that this is in part because while I was a decent scientist, I was not a great one. I closed my lab when my last R1 grant ended, having found good landing places for my team members. I believe that the mark of a good performance is knowing when to get off the stage. And once I realized I would never make it to the lofty heights of my youthful ideals, and had reconciled myself to it, I exited stage left for a costume change. One of the new roles I took on involved building international collaborations on behalf of the faculty of the Cancer Center. This was endlessly fascinating work. I traveled to 40 countries over a 7-year period, leading delegations, learning about cancer care and research across the world. I learned that there are both common elements in the fight against the disease and specific challenges faced in each environment. My focus was on supporting the goals of the faculty who participated in this program, and this was very satisfying to me. I learned that helping other people achieve their goals can be a goal for me. The other role was a more traditional academic affairs role, and it is here that I had the privilege of working with your dean, Dr. Bean. We worked together in the graduate school. I was involved in education, research, training, and faculty career cycles. Although fewer airplanes were involved, I also focused on making the goals of others materialize, whether it be a first degree for an undergraduate or tenure for a faculty member. And while it is commonplace for academicians to look down on administrators, even those who come from their own ranks, I say it is an honorable thing to serve others. I took this concept of serving others seriously, and I feel that my impact has been much greater in such roles than when I worked in my lab. Changed my mind. When the presidency of the Cancer Center changed a few years later, this led to a reorganization of much of the leadership structure, and the two portfolios I had held were broken up and distributed in a way that didn't make sense to me. It was time to find new opportunities, something that happens not infrequently in today's world for people who work in all kinds of industries. I encourage you to consider that this may happen to you, and even to anticipate it if you can, if only to lessen the impact. I never thought it would happen to me, but it did. It can be very disorienting to be looking for a job, not from a position of choice, but because you must find one, especially in middle age. There is no easy advice here, no single solution. In my experience, the network of people you have in these crucial times is key. It can be a source of leads for finding positions, and also a source of support. Perhaps my best advice is, build the network always, even if it does not come naturally to you, because one day you may need it. That does not mean making friends with people, but it does mean showing interest in the work of others, and being open to helping them if you can, when you can, and engaging with your community through roles in professional organizations and in your home institutions beyond your defined job responsibility. And soon we're coming to the second bobblehead. After a stint at a university institute focused on building learning communities designed to spread scarce knowledge in order to combat inequality, I was fortunate to join the National Cancer Institute in my current role, supporting cancer research training and career development. I feel truly fortunate to be in this role, and if you will permit a brief commercial break, I encourage you all to check out what NCI offers, should you be thinking about a career in cancer research. NCI has a great intramural research program that covers basic, patient-oriented, and clinical research, and we offer grants for many career stages. I took the job a few weeks before the pandemic broke, so I have never met the man represented by the second bobblehead, Dr. Anthony Fauci, in person. He has come virtually to NCI to talk to us about what is going on with COVID, and I found him to be inspiring, humble, and personable. I pre-ordered his bobblehead when it came out, and he now stands on my desk making the famous flatten the curve hand gesture. Dr. Fauci has a very impressive scientific track record in terms of discovery, but even more impressive is the impact he has had through other means. We all know him through his public stance during the current pandemic, and that is in itself huge. Before that, he was involved in PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief under President George W. Bush, a program credited with saving a generation of people in Africa. Of course, he has also led one of the NIH Institute's, Allergy and Infectious Diseases, for over 25 years as well. The last year or so, he has navigated very difficult terrain, staying true to his scientific center. I particularly admire the fact that he changed his stance on the significance of wearing masks when the evidence changed. This, to me, epitomizes what distinguishes science, the ability to change one's mental model of how the world works when the information changes. So, Dr. Fauci's bobblehead makes me think of the role of science in society, the need for good scientific thinking and policymaking in all spheres of life. And he is a person who exemplifies this often underrated work. They don't give a Nobel for public health or implementation. Yet. So, why do I still have Dr. Watson's bobblehead on my desk? Well, part of it is that while he revealed some substantial flaws, he still accomplished a great deal and made contributions to science that are hard to take away from him. He does exemplify an important kind of scientific contribution, the breakthrough in knowledge. It's hard to imagine a time when we didn't have a clue how DNA looked or worked, and so much that we take for granted today depends on knowing this. At the same time, he also exemplifies an outdated way of thinking about how scientists accomplish those breakthroughs. The idea of the brilliant, solitary, white male investigator working alone to solve a key challenge with little to hand except his intellect is no longer as relevant, if it ever was. Even Watson and Crick benefited from the ideas of each other, of others they talked to, and the data that others generated. In reality, science is teamwork that requires many different kinds of skills and proceeds in fits and starts. Lastly, he stands as a warning about biases, which are often ugly. We must acknowledge we have them, and that scrupulous vigilance is required to guard against them. So, I like to look at Dr. Watson and Dr. Fauci, standing next to one another, each representing a very different way in which the scientist can make an impact, and each also serving as a reminder of things we need to change, to make science better and the world better. So far, they haven't gotten into any fistfights. So, that's also the reason I'm still in science, and even working on trying to get more smart people to work in scientific careers. Despite the flaws I mentioned earlier, science is still the best place to be if you want to make a difference in the world, in my opinion. Just look at what Dr. Fauci has achieved, and what others have achieved based on the discovery of the DNA structure. I'm excited to see all of you have made the same choice. I would like to warn you that you will see things you might not have expected as you embark on the next steps of your careers. You may be horrified, even disappointed. That's natural. I encourage you to stay with it. Use the hard learnings you're likely to encounter to inform actions you can take to make things better. We can always make science better, and it will take all of us to do so. Our very survival may depend on it. Today, you have joined the 13% of people in the US who have obtained a graduate degree. That makes you part of an elite group in this great country, known for its amazing contributions to human knowledge and progress. That's a privilege and brings responsibility with it. I say privilege because although you all work very hard to get your degree, and many of you not only in school but also outside it, and you likely overcame some serious obstacles along the way, you had that chance. You seized it. Fantastic. Congratulations. But you had to have it in order to seize it. Sadly, there are many people across the world that don't get that same chance. I've always been acutely aware of my own educational privilege, and it's been a strong motivator to work for the common good. And I say responsibility because having had the opportunity to acquire the skills you now possess gives you a chance to become part of something bigger in the service of mankind. The world needs educated people like you to do the things you know how to do to further human health. Take on one of the world's big challenges, cancer, viral disease, Alzheimer's to name a few, and make your mark. But the world also needs educated people for everything else, everything besides the work you're trained and focused on. It needs educated citizens, it needs educated parents and teachers for the next generation. The world is getting flatter and flatter, and information and ideas are traversing the world at an unprecedented speed. But thinking that this will automatically lead to more knowledge, more enlightenment, or better decisions by government and people is, I think by now, discredited. As you have just shown over the past several years, knowledge is gained by combining information with hard work, experience, and the scientific method. And that is what I challenge you to do as you continue your lifelong learning journey. Apply the scientific method to questions outside your job. You are some of the very few now equipped to do that. Look at the evidence and let your thoughtfulness be your guide. Try and look past the many games that are played with knowledge, the so-called controversies that are often cooked up around subjects that have been well and truly settled by the experts. These are distractions when there are so many truly unanswered questions, many interesting and some vital to our future. I have a confession to make. There is one more bobblehead. I'm almost too embarrassed to mention it. Almost. Just recently, my wife, Irene, gave me a bobblehead of myself as a gag gift. I know, I've done nothing to deserve bobbling. Looks remarkably lifelike, though. Well, if I were to shave off my beautiful pandemic beard and lose the COVID-15. I haven't put it with the others yet, but as I passed it in the hallway, it reminds me of another very important thing in life, and one in which I am truly fortunate. I have a life partner who supports and loves me. In my book, it's Irene who should have a bobblehead. I cannot give you advice here, but only express my hope that you too will experience a supportive and loving relationship. It can make all the things talked about today so much more manageable. So, let me congratulate you on your hooding today. Wish you a long and prosperous life with good work, good relationships, and as much happiness as you can manage.
Welcome, and thank you for attending this evening's hooding ceremony. Although graduates this year are not able to be hooded in person by their faculty mentors, they were asked to share the name of a specific faculty member who has meant the most to them during their academic journey. Therefore, their mentor's name will be read as part of the ceremony. We will begin the evening with candidates for the degree of Masters in Science and Biotechnology. Candidates, please bring your avatars to the stage as your name is read. Please stand at the center of the white circle in front of the podium. Take a short moment to bow, dance, or sing, and after your name is called, return to your seat. Shall we begin? Victor Abarca. Candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Aisha Amin. Please take a stand in the center of the stage, in the white circle, as your name is called. Aisha Amin, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Nikan Azarafruz, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Sina Safai. Amadou Babana El Alawi, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Hiba Bangash, candidate for the degree of Master of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Alexis Body, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Marinda Wilson Pham. You wait a second, I'll come to the stage and greet you. Nia Chanel Bowles, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. John Magnotti. Please take a step in the center of the stage. Dr. Magnotti. Thank you. Ashley Nicole Riel Edmond, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Marinda Wilson Pham. Thank you. Jose Manuel Garcia Jr., candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Marinda Wilson Pham. Thank you, Jose. Teresa Gutierrez, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Linda Hamed, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Yiman Han, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Sina Safai. Yiman is also the winner of the Graduate College Student Council Biotechnology Master Service Award. Asharina Homa, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Matthew Kinlow, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Miranda Wilson-Pham and Dr. Antonio Abeyta. Matthew is also the winner of the Arthur V. Prancan Award for Excellence in Biotechnology. Julia Kirkland, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Jeffrey Oswald. Lawrence Lett, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Miranda Wilson-Pham. Yay. Congratulations. Alexis McCullough, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Miranda Wilson-Pham. I'm coming around, just give me 1 second. All right, congratulations. Jesse Jonathan Molina Mello, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Miranda Wilson-Pham. Adedayo Ogundipe, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Crystal Ortiz, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Denis Avashnikov, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Sina Safai. Katerina Panos, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Miranda Wilson-Pham. Siddharth Manik Ravula, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Miranda Wilson-Pham. 1 second, Sid. Jack Rubertus, candidate for the degree of Master's of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Stephen Santoro, Candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Miranda Wilson, Pham. Kanika Sharma. Candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Tyler Soy. Tyler Soy. Candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Miranda Wilson Pham. All right. Tina Suggs, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Sina Safai. Varun Swaminarayan, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Dominique Tucker, all right, Dominique Tucker, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Jemiah Whitehorn, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Biotechnology, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Please congratulate the candidates for the Masters of Science in Biotechnology. Will the candidates for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research please bring your avatars to the stage? As your name is read, please move to the white circle in front of the podium where you can celebrate this honor. Shilpa Arora, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Meenakshi Jolly. Niraj Chabra, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Nandini Dayananda, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Meenakshi Jolly. Alondra Diaz, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Omonigu Ekomu, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Pramod Gaikwad, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Megan Elizabeth Gross, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Elizabeth Marie Guzik, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Sami Hussein, Candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Ali Nujadi, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Rashni Abi Patel, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Shrina Pithida, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Mabube Madavina. Richard Anthony Rod, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Ihsan Rawani, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Gabriela Sanzo, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Paul Garvey. Nicholas J. Skirtich, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Amy N. Shah. Sumit Sohal, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Rizwana Syed, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Safir Gieser. Samantha Lynn Terranella, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Anne Patricia Timmerman, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Jamil Shemu. Krishna Kishore Umapathy, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Aaron Lee Wegman, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Please help me welcome the candidates. Please help me congratulate the candidates for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research. Will the candidates for the degree of Masters of Science in Integrated Biomedical Sciences please bring your avatars to the stage? As your name is read, please move to the white circle in front of the podium. Before we move to the candidates in the Integrated Biomedical Sciences, I'd like to call Maureen Qureshi to the center stage. We apologize for Maureen for leaving you off the program. So please help me congratulate Maureen Qureshi, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Clinical Research, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Will the candidates for the degree of Masters of Science in Integrated Biomedical Sciences please bring your avatars to the stage? As your name is read, please move to the white circle in front of the podium. Leora Aviva Kramer, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Andrew Bean. Leora is also the winner of the Graduate College Student Council Integrated Biomedical Sciences Master Service Award. Gabrielle F. Coy, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Andrew Zloza and Dr. Kajal Gupta.
Thank you, Gabby, here through Angelica.
Waddell Brandon Lee Holmes, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Jitesh Pratap. Angelica Reyes, candidate for the degree of Masters of Science in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Jeffrey Schneider. Please help me congratulate the candidates for the degree of Masters of Sciences in Integrated Biomedical Science. Will the candidates for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences please bring your avatars to the stage? As your name is read, please move to the white circle in front of the podium. Andrew Richard Armstrong, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Celeste Napier. Isadora Daphne Kalma, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Celeste Napier. Diptaman Chatterjee, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Jeffrey H. Kortauer. Diptaman is also the winner of the John E. Trufant Award for Excellence in Graduate Research. Salvatore Di Bartolo III, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Mani Wasi. Barbara Alice Hansen, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Igor Korolnik. Jade He, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Marcus Wimmer. Jade is also the winner of the Graduate College Dean's Award for Leadership and Service. Benjamin Michael Hiller, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Jeffrey Kortauer. Shingo Ishihara, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Anne-Marie Malfate. Asia Jackson, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Christopher Forsyth. Oscar Antonio Jimenez, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Lena Alharthi. Ahmad Hassan Othman, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Jitesh Pratap. Marco Rossi, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences, hooded by Dr. Andrew Zloza. Please help me congratulate the candidates for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Integrated Biomedical Sciences. Will the candidates for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Nursing please bring your avatars to the stage? As your name is read, please move to the white circle in front of the podium. Catherine June Rockland, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Nursing, hooded by Dr. Olympia Pond. Audrey Rosenblatt, candidate for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Nursing, hooded by Dr. Michael Creamer. Will all the candidates please rise and turn to the audience? Please help me congratulate the Rush University Graduate College class of 2021. Thank you.
And now we'd like to hear from the president of our Graduate Student Association, Sarah Calhoun.
Hello, and good evening, everybody. I have had the pleasure of being the Graduate College Student Council President for the last year. I'm currently a fourth-year PhD student in the Integrated Biomedical Sciences program. It's been a great adventure with everybody here trying to finish the degree. Let's see if I can turn myself around. There we go. Okay. I would like to start off by congratulating this year's graduates. Graduate college is always an accomplishment, but this year's students have shown exemplary perseverance in what has probably been one of the strangest and most stressful years of our lives. Your commitment to your education in science is truly admirable. Each year, the graduate college student recognizes 2 master's students, one from the Master's in Integrated Biomedical Sciences and one from the Master's in Biotechnology, for the service to the graduate college. This year's attendees were nominated by the awardees, were nominated by their peers and selected by the Graduate College Student Council. Attending classes, working in lab, or shadowing clinicians is just one part of the students' careers, but some students will also make the time to volunteer outside of their education while participating in graduate college events. We would like to thank these students for their service to the graduate college. This year's Integrated Biomedical Science Master's Service Award winner is Leora Kramer. Leora not only completed her master's this year, she was also an active member of the Graduate College Student Council and found time to volunteer around the city. For this year's Master's in Biotechnology Service Award, the winner is Iman Han. Iman not only spent the year actively working hard to complete her master's degree, but also frequently attended Graduate College Student Council events and served as a member of the Professional Development Committee. Congratulations to you both. Your hard work in graduate school will help you excel in whatever path life takes you on next. Next, I would like to announce the Mentor and Teacher of the Year Award. While students make the heart of the graduate college, the faculty and professors are the foundation. Without the excellent professorship and mentorship from the faculty here at Rush, us students would be lost. Each year, the graduate college also recognizes the investment and achievements of faculty who made an especially large impact on its students. These faculty were nominated and selected by graduate college students. This year, I had the pleasure to award Dr. Carl Mackey with the Mentor of the Year Award. Dr. Mackey taught several courses where he mentored students in laboratory techniques and molecular biology. He has also mentored new rotating students in his laboratory throughout the year. Dr. Mackey has invested his students' careers and educations beyond graduate school. Congrats, Dr. Mackey. For this year's Teacher of the Year Award, we would like to congratulate Dr. Jitesh Pratap. Dr. Pratap has also taught several courses this year while he prepared students to be successful after graduate school. Dr. Pratap is always committed to providing the best teaching to his students and to adapting to the ever-progressing world of science education. Congrats, Dr. Pratap. I'd like to wrap up by congratulating all the student graduates today, and thank you to all the faculty who have ensured the success of these students. Good luck to everyone on the next step of their journey.
Thanks to friends and family and the faculty and students and Dr. Bogler for coming today. A special thank you to the Graduate College staff and NAM FAM for creating everything that you have seen here today. This was quite an undertaking. Behind the scenes pictures are due and will be forthcoming. While we would have preferred to celebrate with you in person, we hope you enjoyed the evening's event. Please stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to celebrating with you at alumni events in the near future. Congratulations to all graduates and their families and friends. Have a great evening. Goodbye.